Am I wearing a smoky eye at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday? Yes. Yes, I am. You guys all know by now that I first began drawing and painting realistic portraits. If you didn't know that, hi, I'm Srish and I first began drawing and painting realistic portraits. However, over time, I've started to enjoy throwing in little bits of fun stylistic choices, and I feel like that makes my art so much more personal, so much more character driven. While realism is amazing and so powerful, over time it's kind of lost its charm for me. I found that over the last 3 years or so, I'm veering more towards stylistic portraits and character art that capture the mood and story rather than simply just the visual details. Today I'm going to share with you my 5 key steps that you can use right now to find your art style or simply stylize the art that you're already creating. And the way we're going to do this is by taking a colored pencil drawing of a portrait that I created back in 2013 and turning it into a more stylized digital version, like something I would create today. So whenever you're ready, give this video a big thumbs up, hit that subscribe button and notification bell down below. And remember, you can now become a channel member by hitting the join button below to grab some super exclusive tutorials every single week. And with all that said, let us now look at my 5 key steps to finding your art style. The scene we're gonna work with today is this one. Yes, this is Daenerys in the middle of what I consider to be the most powerful scene in the show. It is the Dracarys moment, and I'm gonna paint it a second time because I'm a grown woman and I can paint it as many times as I would like to. We'll get to that painting a little later in the video, but just thought I'd let you guys know. And obviously, because I paint characters, I can only really speak to stylized character art. But the majority of these points are mindset based, so they can definitely translate to any subject you love painting. Alright, let's get into this list. Here is an old clip of me painting a super realistic portrait in acrylic paints. You can tell it's old because the aspect ratio and video quality are just phenomenal. But regardless, I can honestly tell you that starting out drawing and painting more realistic stuff has genuinely sped up the process of finding my style. Why? Because stylized work is about bending reality into a more aesthetically driven version of itself. And in order to do this, you kind of need to know what reality is like to begin with. Look, I know, you don't want to spend hours doing photo studies and practicing line and form, and you'd rather jump into drawing those super cool anime characters with the fancy costumes and laser guns. But the truth is, those characters only work because their creators understand reality. When you understand realistic proportions and form and the mechanics of movement and weight distribution, you start to understand places where you can push the limits of reality and places where that isn't feasible, where your stylistic choice is just bad design. I first properly got into art in a time where realism and hyperrealism was all the rage online. If you could make a painting look like a photograph, that was an instant 100 likes. And that was honestly just a stroke of luck because as a completely self-taught portrait artist, pop culture essentially drove me to learn the basics of human proportions. However, with the amount of tutorials available today, you absolutely don't need to start with realism. You can totally jump right into comic style proportions or Disney faces or whatever. But if you genuinely want to find your own unique style, nothing is as powerful as understanding realism. It's like learning the alphabet so you can eventually go on to write your own epic trilogies. That said, however, you really don't need to spend years and years studying every little detail of the human body or what every muscle and tendon is called. But I highly recommend understanding force, body dynamics, realistic proportions, light and shadow, and how to render materials. If you're not sure where to start, I highly recommend this book by George Bridgman called Constructive Anatomy, as well as any of the Force books by Michael Mattesi. They teach you anatomy in a more practical sense and have definitely expedited my learning. Plus, another area of study is design thinking. Understanding shapes, composition, and perspective, as well as color and light, have helped me so much because instead of taking my initial sketches and giving them bog standard color and light treatment, I am able to use lights and colors and perspective and composition as part of my stylistic choices. Learn the fundamentals and I promise you'll be in a much better position to find your own style. So, I don't know if you know this feeling, but when I first began working on my own style, I struggled a lot with having too many sources of inspiration. Hell, I still do, because when I'm putting together a vision board for each painting, I tend to get a little lost in the source of all these beautiful stylized paintings on Pinterest and Google and whatnot. I'll see a gorgeous classical dramatic painting from Bastien Lecouf and I want to go all Rembrandt, but then I see a Ross Tran painting which is like the opposite end of the spectrum and suddenly I want to do that instead. However, and this is so ironic, through doing the style studies series, I found that it has actually helped me eliminate certain styles that are just not as fun for me to paint. And that's cool because there are millions of you who love those styles and would kill to be able to paint like that, right? The point is to experiment. If you find an art style that is even semi-interesting to you, try it out for yourself. This, I think, is the most important part of finding your style, is to allow yourself the time and space to just play with it. Go into the process with an open mind and zero expectations. When I say zero expectations, I legit mean zero. Sit down with your tablet or sketchbook or whatever and be okay with the idea that nothing productive might come from this session. That is perfectly fine. It isn't ever a waste because in finding things that don't work for you, you're narrowing your focus a little more each time. And before you know it, you'll have found your style through the simple process of elimination. Oh, by the way, you're watching me draw another realistic portrait from back in the day, this time in color pencils. Yes, I was a Cumberbatch fan, don't at me, I still am. One more thing I want you to understand right now is this. Your style is going to grow and evolve with you. Here's the thing, your art style will only ever have one constant characteristic, and that is that you enjoy painting it. That is the only constant in this game, and as we grow and change, the things that we love and enjoy doing are also bound to change. However, a lot of us who think we've found our art style tend to squeeze ourselves into a little box. We kind of tie ourselves to this style, and should our creative minds want to experiment some more, we shut it down instantly because that would be against our established art style. But guess what? It is only your art style if you enjoy painting it. So by forcing ourselves to continue painting in a style that doesn't spark joy anymore, we're essentially not even painting in our own style. And on a similar vein, never force your art style to fit in with what is currently popular. Because art trends change pretty much every season, and if you're trying to build an audience around your work and you keep changing your art to fit with what is currently in vogue, the instability is going to reflect in your popularity. You'll likely never have lifelong fans, but rather your audience will transit in and out, and then you're gonna have to go through the process of starting to get to know people every time you change your style. It's just so much work. So I guess at the end of the day, it's about finding that balance between having a signature style, but also allowing the flexibility and space for your style to grow and evolve as you grow and evolve. But at the core of it, this step is all about clarity. Give yourself the time to experiment and study other stylized work and to draw and paint a whole bunch of scrap and iterations, because through this, you will eventually notice a trend in your favorite work. Once you find that trend, fine-tune it and boom, you have the beginnings of your own art style. Alright, now let's get into the more practical bits about stylizing your work. When it comes to character art, the kind of proportions you use can really create a precedent for who the character is and what kind of lives they live. Your character's proportions really lay the groundwork for all of your stylistic choices. In fact, this is why I highly encourage you to 1. Understand realism, 2. Get clear about your style, and 3. Understand design and some basic shape psychology. You need to know all of this because the shapes and proportions you use at this stage will determine the feeling that your style evokes. For instance, here are a couple of basic tips that are so easy to understand but often overlooked when you're self-taught. If you're going for a cute, friendly, innocent character, go for exaggerated large eyes, a tiny nose and mouth, narrow jaws, and overall round shapes. As far as rendering is concerned, you want to stick to very soft gradients and subtle value shifts. If you're going for a more grown-up character, however, think more angular. Break out all of those triangles and pointy chins, hard edges, and very sharp tonal shifts with super darks and super lights. Here you want to really push the contrast. Obviously, these are two opposite ends of the spectrum, and when you're trying to find your own style, it is rarely quite so black and white. In fact, you might aim for a more sophisticated art style where the characters have moral ambiguity, and that translates to more subtle, complex design choices while still keeping up that aesthetic appeal. And I'll keep harping on about it, but this is why it is so important to have clarity when it comes to the first couple of steps, because it really helps inform your design choices and make important decisions when it comes to your art style. So play around with the proportions before anything else, and you'll set yourself up for a very distinctive end product. When it comes to rendering your sketch, I always recommend choosing your light setup first. While I do have a video about painting lights and I highly recommend watching it, that is more about rendering the lights that you've chosen. Here I'm talking about choosing that light in the first place. No matter what your proportions are, your lighting setup will almost always take over the mood and setting of your piece. In this painting, for instance, I'm not sticking completely to the original lighting setup because the mood I'm going for is a lot more dramatic, and you can only really tell the difference because I'm starting off with a very clear lighting setup. In Patreon tutorials, I literally always make my viewers start with putting down a value scale. Literally, out of the 5 studies that we've done so far, all 5 of them start with putting out the darkest and lightest values because it honestly helps you decide a couple of really important things. First, it tells you what your tonal scale and contrast are going to be like. Is it a high contrast piece with tons of strong shadows and drama? Is it a more pastel illustration where you have fairly low contrast and it gives you a much lighter, carefree image? This can really make or break the emotion that you're going for, so always consider this first. And secondly, your value scale determines where the light is coming from and the kind of shadows that it casts on and around your character. I went into detail about this in that lighting video, so I'm not going to go into it here, but where you position your light and the quality and shapes of the shadows that it casts has a massive impact on the mood of your painting. For instance, with the art that I love looking at, I'm almost always drawn towards more dramatic light setups. However, when it comes to creating art, I tend to veer more towards super bright lighting, because that's just the kind of person that I am, and I'm not going to try and force myself to create art in someone else's style. Unless it's a style study, but like I've said time and again, that series is purely a space for us to experiment. But the important thing to remember is this: the art that you consume doesn't always have to be the art that you create. And your style will change and evolve over time because you will change and evolve over time. So whatever choices you make at the moment, do not feel like you have to stay married to them for the rest of your art career. If you're into bright, vivid light at the moment, that's cool. If over time you fall more in love with grey, moody lighting, that's cool too. But in either case, always consider your lighting setup before anything else because it can honestly make or break the painting. So I was talking to someone recently and we spoke for a while and came to the conclusion that I legit cannot call a painting finished and be happy about it. Like, I genuinely have to force myself to overlay my signature onto a painting and save it as a PNG, or I would happily spend 30 more hours trying to tweak it over and over again and still not be satisfied with it. And when you're doing more stylized work, this is twice as hard because there is no blueprint for when you're supposed to stop harassing your painting and just lay it to rest. And this is especially true if you deal with anxiety and obsessive tendencies, because that's just a downward spiral waiting to happen. So to deal with this, I always suggest coming up with a finishing routine. Again, I have a whole video where I walk you through the steps that I take in order to finish my paintings, but your routine doesn't have to be anything at all like mine. The point is to notice any trends in how you finish your paintings and turn that into a structured template. Because structure is pretty much the only thing that helps me break that cycle of anxiety and, as much as I hate to use the term, obsessive perfectionism. And you'll find that the more you standardize the process and the more steps that you can add to it, the more consistency there will be across your paintings. Like I've said before, the majority of your conscious artistic choices will come into play at the very beginning and the very end of a painting. So once you solidify these two stages, you'll find that your work begins to have a very consistent look and feel, and that, my friend, is your very own unique art style. But if there is one thing I hope you'll take away from this video, it is that finding your art style is basically all about allowing yourself the time and space to grow and evolve as an artist and as a person, and giving yourself that grace of understanding that change might not be such a bad thing after all. At the end of the day, it takes a bunch of patience and dedicated effort to find your art style, and as much as I personally have zero patience for anything at all, I can promise you this is definitely an investment you want to make towards your art career. So I hope this video has brought you some clarity, and if it's helped, then please make sure to give me a big thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below and notification bell, because next week is the final week of February, and I don't know about you, but I personally think the last week of every month is really special. I'm just saying. Become a channel member now by hitting that join button down below to grab instant access to some exclusive, intensive tutorials and content that I have on there already. And with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more cool videos up here, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!